See people filing in now. We've not started the session yet. We're just chit-chatting before we hit the record button. But hello, Andrew. We've got Bet, Darren, Ema, Emily, Jessica, John. Thank you for all joining us. Hi, Nicholas. Feel free to let us know where you're joining us from in the chat box as well. Frank's just joined us. Hey, Chris. Chris from Connecticut. Andrew from sunny Watford. So for the benefit of everybody, Andrew is probably being facetious there. I'm guessing it's just as sunny in Watford as it is in Newcastle upon Tyne today, Andrew, right? Bet's in Pennsylvania. Sophia's wearing a slippers, she says. Jessica in Germany. Marissa's in Malta. Gillian from Sandbach. I know Sandbach very well in Cheshire. We've got Darren joining from Golden, Colorado. Emma is joining from Wexford, Ireland. We've got Damon joining us from Texas. Whereabouts in Texas? Texas is a big place, isn't it, Damon? So, and Jenks is joining us from the Costa del Blythe, up the road from me in Northumberland, where I'm guessing the weather is just as fine as it is here in Newcastle. Horrible and wet. Yeah, if you want to join in the chat with us, we'll get started in a couple of minutes. But if you want to join in the chat with us, feel free to change the Zoom option from all panelists and attendees, and then everybody can see what you're saying. Damon says he's from West Texas. So I think I'm right in saying this, but Texas is big enough so that the UK, where I'm coming from, could fit in to Texas something like 8 times or something. I can't remember. But we are tiny compared to Texas. So. Johnny joining us from New York City, my favorite place on earth. Not sure I'll be getting back to there for a little while, but I love Manhattan and I love pizza. 2 things that go very well together. Right. I can see everybody filing in. So Rory, Eben, if you're comfortable, we will get started next.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Cool. So, Katrin, I don't know if you can still hear me, but if you want to hit the record button, make sure that people can watch the recording back as well. Cool. We are good to go then. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this very special Smileback webinar on Net Promoter Score, or NPS. I'm joined today by 2 absolute experts in this field, Eben Marks and Rory Gallagher, and you're already smiling when I'm calling you experts in this field, but you are, right? Yeah, so Eben, perhaps we can turn to you first of all. We've talked before about customer service and how important it is. Net Promoter Score is a topic that comes up again and again and again in conversation. But for those of us who are not familiar with it, what is NPS? What is Net Promoter Score?
Yeah, so Net Promoter Score is another type of survey. It's a kind of a simple way of trying to get a gauge on customer satisfaction, especially customer loyalty. So we'll be looking in this webinar at what NPS is, why it's useful, and then how to use it, how to respond to the information you get from NPS, both on the level of the individual response and then also on the larger trends. And then we'll be taking a look at actually how it works in Smileback, and there'll be plenty of chances to ask questions. So to go a little bit more into what is NPS, so Net Promoter Score is a type of survey. It was developed in the early 2000s by Bain and Company and Harvard Business School. And it asks people how likely they are to recommend a company or a service or a product to their peers or their friends or their colleagues. The wording is always something along those lines. It changes a little bit depending on the industry. And what's really aimed at doing is focusing who are the most and who are the least enthusiastic customers, and trying to boil that down. So as you can see in the illustrations here in the slide, on the left is an NPS survey created with Smileback, and you can see you've got the question and the scale from 0 to 10. And then on the right, there's an illustration really of how that scoring works. And what you might notice is green, the color of happy, positive customers, that only appears right at the end, at the 9 to 10. Whereas red is all the way from 0 to 6. And like I say, it's not really looking for every stop and every nuance along the scale. It's like, who are the people who are really happy and who are the people who basically aren't happy? And it's kind of weighted to the poles like that.
So we've got people joining us from all over the world today. I can see in the chat log, we've got people from New York City, all the way from just up the road from me in the UK. So we've got all types of managed service providers and IT support companies out there. Let me know in the chat if you are familiar with Net Promoter Score, NPS, whether you use it in your business now, or whether, like so many of us, that NPS is completely new to you and something that you're not familiar with. Rory, I'll turn to you as well. What would you say the difference between Net Promoter Score, which seems quite a simplistic but very powerful idea, and customer satisfaction as a whole? Because obviously the Smileback platform deals with Csat as a whole. How does NPS fit in as a piece of that jigsaw?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of the scope of what you're measuring is the primary difference. Csat is it's very transactional. So say you're working a support ticket, somebody has an issue, they raise it with your company, your team works on it, and then they get a survey, whether it's like Smileback where it has 3 smiley faces or something on the lines that's trying to ask them to rate that experience. So they're very much rating the transaction and how that went. NPS is much more of a relationship-driven metric. So instead of measuring like a specific transaction, really what the question is asking is, what kind of value do they perceive of your service overall? Would they recommend it to their friend or a colleague? The kind of analogy we use for this is it's like date versus relationship. So say you're married and you go out on date night on Friday night. Csat is asking your partner like, oh hey, how did you like dinner tonight? Was that a nice date? Versus NPS is asking like, are you happy in this marriage? So you can tell how totally different scope of questions. Both can give you a lot of meaningful insights and it could be meaningful data to take back. But I really see that's the kind of the primary difference is instead of your day-to-day transactional nature of things, it's like figuring out, say, how a really important contact feels about your service overall and the value you're bringing.
Got it. That makes absolute sense. And I'm seeing in the chat, we've got probably a 50-50 split between people who are using NPS at the moment and familiar with it and those people who it's completely new to. I think most people obviously are doing some degree of customer satisfaction. Probably with Smileback, but let us know what tools you're using in the chat box as well. But not so many are using NPS, and we've had a couple of people, including Mike, who said he knew it in a previous job, NPS, that is, a large Fortune 500 company, but he's never seen it in an MSP. So Rory, if I can turn to you, again, we've got Csat and lots of MSPs are familiar with that. Where is Net Promoter Score really useful for managed service providers, and how would you recommend they use it?
So for managed service providers, I find it's really important, at least especially if you're starting out trying to gather this type of feedback, is to pick some frequency. We recommend doing it on like a quarterly basis, and in particular, go with people who it would be very useful for you to understand how they feel about the overall relationship. Yeah. So I know particularly for managed services, either people really want to be doing quarterly business reviews or are really diligent about doing them. In particular, this is a great survey to send to your contact you're going to go meet with beforehand. They'll give you a really good idea of like whether or not you're walking into like a very pleasant conversation or like a very challenging one. So in particular, I would say like quarterly and at least start off with main contacts. And if you're really like limited and just want to focus, start off with maybe like your really key clients, your biggest clients are the ones you put the most sort of account management and effort into.
Got it. And Eben, I'm going to turn to you. We've got a number of people saying they're very familiar with Csat and using it and getting good value out of it, but perhaps not using NPS within the business. If you could summarize why you would use NPS in conjunction with Csat, how could you convince people on the call here today that NPS is going to be a good fit for them?
Yeah, so to sort of build on what Rory was saying, Csat, which I hope you're all using, and if not, please talk to us about setting up a Smile Back trial. Csat is really good for finding out service ticket by service ticket how your team doing, and you will quickly find out from that, like, are people mostly happy? Are they sometimes unhappy? And if so, why? Because you will often see in the comments, this took too long, or they didn't communicate well enough. And you can target, fixing problems with dealing with service tickets in particular, or even particular types of tickets, particular customers, maybe even particular members of staff on your end. NPS is really good at finding out about really all the things that are not covered by that. So that can mean things like, pricing. Does the cost of your service still fit with that customer's needs and abilities? Fit on a larger sense, are they saying like, yeah, this is great, you're an invaluable partner to us, 10 every time? Or are they saying something like, well, it was good when we started, but now we feel like you don't really respond to us very well, or we are starting to think of changing providers. So as Rory's saying, trying to maybe prevent sort of that nasty surprises you might get where, when you talk to someone in a quarterly review, possibly having not really spoken to that particular person in a long time, if they're not really involved in the day-to-day of the support tickets, it's about finding out about that and running NPS on that kind of schedule where it's not tied to a particular support ticket like Csat is a good part of that. Because let's say you do run it every quarter, maybe a couple of weeks before you are already due to meet those people, it helps build up a larger bank of information and a kind of a wider view of how your customers feel about your company.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And we've got lots of people saying, Rory, that they love your analogy about NPS being about marriage and Csat being dates. Victor says that's a brilliant analogy. Claire agrees with Victor, great way of exploring it. So I want to jump into the weeds of this a little bit. So I think I love your analogy there, Rory. So Csat for sort of for specific cases, for specific tickets, NPS for the relationship overall, perhaps. And Robert quite wisely says in the chat here that it talks about managing by metrics. So what do we do when we get an NPS score through? What does it mean? I think we can work out what a sort of a 1 to 6 score means, that perhaps they're not happy, but aren't most people tempted to just say, yeah, it's all right, it's a 7? Give us an insight on what we should do with these sort of results.
Yeah, I could go first. I think Evan will be good to speak at as well, because he does this day in and day out with just responses from the Smileback customer base. But I think so 9s and 10s are your promoters. So they're people that they love your business. They're literally saying they'd recommend you. These are really good people to ask for referrals. So these are very obviously people that could be champions and they see a lot of value. Good to see there. I think the passive stance, the 7 and 8 are ones that you definitely can't ignore it. Even when we say on the Csat side of things, like we try not to ignore even a neutral response that comes in and just say, well, it's not negative, so let's not deal with it. But these are ones that are people that maybe could potentially be at risk in the future, or maybe not. You want to get them to the promoter stance. And then the detractors are people that I think you want to respond to immediately. And I've seen where a lot of value is when you run NPS over a longer period of time. And like, if you have a contact that is routinely giving you 9s and 10s, and then out of nowhere, one quarter gives you a 4, like that's they're waving the red flag to say like something's happened. And I now went from being a big promoter who's very loyal to being completely at risk. And I think I would recommend like having a process to immediately deal with that and try to at least get to the root of what happened and see if you can turn it around.
So Eben, you use these, and perhaps we'll jump onto the tools in a minute, because we've already got people asking about like how do they gather this information?
Yeah.
But you work with MSPs and IT companies every day. You get these sort of results through. First of all, I guess a question: how often should we be sending NPS, trying to gather NPS data out? And secondly, what sort of systems and processes have you seen people put in place for dealing with the results based on what Rory said about 9s and 10s? We definitely should be looking for referrals.
Yeah, so we to talk about the timing first then. Yeah, sending it on a repeating basis is the most useful way really of doing NPS, because getting kind of trend information is very valuable. So as Rory says, are people getting more happy or less happy, right? Is your overall score as a company getting better or worse? You've got value in both the individual response and then in the aggregate. And as for how often to do it, the usual thing to do is like every quarter or maybe every 4 months, every 6 months. Longer than that is not necessarily going to give you, information quick enough. Shorter than that might kind of bombard people. In Smilebag, we do let you send it once a month, but I would say that's more for some specific cases where you might have a particular group of people for like a time limited period. You're kind of checking with them more often. As for how to respond to it, I've got a little kind of suggestion here on the screen. The simplest thing to do is, when they come in, is to just pick up the phone and email people, right? What we do is we have some processes around this, and it's pretty lightweight. I just made a tracker, made some very short, almost like kind of little process maps of like how to respond to different kind of red flag indicators, and one of those for us would be passive or the tracker to NPS score. So thinking about what do you want to do in advance, basically, because the nice thing about NPS is a simple question, it's simple scores. You already know that an NPS score must be between 0 and 10, and really it just falls into these 3 categories. So therefore you can already start thinking of producing like a template email. Once you've been doing it for a while, you will probably start to see trends. I mean, we make software, and there aren't so many different things that people are happy or unhappy about software. People like it when software runs well. They like it when you release new features that meet their needs, and they like it when you give them good support. They don't like it when it doesn't run well. They don't like it when it's too expensive, and they don't like it when you provide good support. So you can come up with guidance on that, not necessarily copying and pasting the same message to everyone every time, but like, here's the kind of things you want to talk about for someone who's unhappy for this reason. Here's an email or an outline of an email that's really good at getting people to agree to be a case study for you, for the people who are happy. That sort of thing is it just brings a level of consistency and effectiveness really in responding to individual responses.
Yeah. So again, thank you everybody for joining us live. We've got Eben and we've got Rory, 2 experts in this. It's clear they know what they're talking about, and they work every day with top MSPs and IT businesses all around the world. So if you've got any questions for them both, please use the Zoom Q&A box to get them in there, and I will make sure that we get them to answer every single one of the questions that come through. Before we move forward though, Rory, I want to turn to you perhaps first of all. So I used to run a managed service provider business. I sold that business about 10 years ago, and there was some reluctance with some of our engineers sometimes to ask for feedback from clients, because they were worried, the client's not going to give a glowing review. How would you suggest that we overcome that reluctance to actually go out and ask for this type of feedback?
That's very good. I see that's a question from Michael Brown as well in the Q&A.
Give me Michael.
He says,
clearly, we've got great minds think alike. So, Rory, before you answer, let me just read Michael's question out. I don't know. So, Michael says, when I've mentioned sending NPS to our clients, there's been some reluctance internally for maybe fear of receiving a score to 0 to 6. So, Michael, you've had exactly the same experience as me. Should NPS be used as a tool to enhance client relationships? Forgive me, Michael, for overlooking your question in the Q&A. Becky, I can see your question, but Rory, let's turn to you first of all to get that to get a response on why we should use it.
Yeah, well, I think there's definitely, it's perfectly valid for people to be concerned, especially if you start out to survey, that you're going to find out some issues and things that are just sort of just not coming to the surface right now. I don't think that's usually a good idea of something to keep with. It's sort of like, just don't survey so that you can just keep telling yourself that everybody's really happy. I mean, and so I think it's 100% a good tool for enhancing the client relationship, because I think there's two ways. One is, all your clients give you great scores, and then you're able to engage with them where you can figure out, one, they'll be saying, I gave them a 10, and they'll tell you exactly what they love about the service, or really what's the most valuable. And then, to have a deeper conversation. And then especially when it isn't a very positive score and you get a detractor in that situation, you have the opportunity to immediately take action and address it. And I know as just something I've learned, even just years of working in customer service, is sometimes your customers are the happiest, not when they've never had an issue, but when they had a problem and then it kind of escalated and then you solved it. And now they've completely flipped to absolutely loving it, because they see that you're proactive and open to criticism and can fix it. So I do think using this, especially something like NPS that is specifically asking them to rate how they feel about the relationship, can be really powerful.
Yeah. And Eben, I've got a quick question for you. I know this is going to get asked because I'm sure there's none in our audience here today, but MSPs tend to be quite competitive. So what would you say is a good overall NPS score for a business? Because Robert has shared very openly, thank you, Robert, in the chat. He said the last survey they did at NPS, their score was 7.8 out of 10. So what would you suggest is, what's cause for concern and what should be pat on the back time?
Yeah, so the way that NPS is calculated, and it's the same with net CSAT score, is it goes all the way down to -100. So if everyone gives you a score of 0 to 6, you get -100. So actually anything above 0 is quite literally positive. As a rough guide, this is, like I say, very rough, 10 to 30 is good. 30 to 50 is very good, and 50 plus is best in class. It varies a lot by industry. And what I've seen so far from our customers is they tend to have scores probably in the 30 plus, because I think MSPs and other professional services are very like relationship centric industries. People are needing to get, renewals every year, every 2 years from their clients. They're having a very high, level of back and forth with clients. But if you live in an area where there is like 1 or 2 utility providers and there's not really much consumer choice, those companies have awful, if those companies get like -10, they're happy, because they don't really have to, give an F about their customers. Also industries where they're really only selling on price and price alone, like budget airlines, terrible NPS scores, because customer satisfaction it isn't the game they're in, right? But this varies. It depends on who's answering. It depends on the location. And something we do want to do with Smileback in the future is provide a bit more in the way of benchmarking, but actually what we need more people to do is to start using our NPS, because then we'll have more data to work from.
Okay, that's interesting. So the more people, perhaps if there's Smileback customers on today's webinar, if you're not using Smileback at the moment, Eben's just said the more people that use it, the more opportunity Smileback will have to perhaps create a benchmark across the industry. So that could be quite interesting for the more competitive of us out there as well. Rory, I want to ask you a question based on something you said earlier, and that's that, if somebody gives a 9 or a 10 to a feedback score, you should be asking for the referral there. Again, Michael and I both mentioned that our engineers had this fear of going out to clients and asking for results just in case they were rubbish. What I've experienced is if we are, as an MSP, if we're too quick to ask for a referral after a net promoter score, people stop filling in the survey results. Is that something you've come across before? And if so, how can we go about dealing with that?
So I think from Smileback's perspective as the product, we've kind of built in the ability for it to turn into like a marketing testimonial or a Google review that's as easy as like clicking a couple boxes. So with the idea in mind of, and I think a lot of the philosophy of kind of how we build Smileback is make the survey as simple and non-time consuming as possible. Therefore, people do see the value in filling it out and know that it's not going to become a burdensome process. I wouldn't immediately jump, the minute you get a 10 and be like, hey, do you have any friends? I would instead use it as an opportunity to thank them, send them, we like to send people swag, boxes of swag, or build the relationship, and then just know that these are good people to ask for. I know one of the questions asked, like, expand on using it as case studies. So if somebody tells you exactly what they love about the service, or what, like, a big problem you fixed, that can give you an idea and a good introduction to be like, hey, we're actually looking at work, like putting together a piece that discusses this, or whatever the format is, and use that to identify who could be, the good person to be represented in that as a customer.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've got some other questions coming in. Again, let us know in the Q&A box if you've got any questions for our experts, Eben and Rory. Eben, I'm going to put you on the spot in a minute, because we've got a number of people asking about if they can have a look at perhaps Smileback and how NPS works within there. So is it possible you could give us a quick demo? Perhaps, or Rory, would you be better off positioned?
Yeah, Rory's going to do that, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll do that. But before we move on, perhaps, Rory, if you can get prepped for that, then we'll put you on the spot with that. So, Eben, if I turn to you as well, how can we ensure, based on what we've just said, about engineers perhaps being scared to send it out in case they get rubbish rates? Rory's already addressed the idea that if we jump on the phone as soon as we get a 9 or a 10 and ask for a referral, we're going to look a little bit desperate. How can we ensure that people give us better response rates? And Brandon asks that question. Do you have any suggestions on how to get better response rates overall?
Yeah, so there's a couple different parts that go into this. One is on the technical side. We have built as much as we can, and we continue to monitor the actual just deliverability of the Smileback survey. And something you'll see that's available in Smileback NPS is the option to configure it to work with your own email domain, which sounds very dry, but it's actually quite important. What that means is you can, rather than sending it from, no reply at Smileback, you can send it from, Richard at Tubb, or what the email address that you choose, which is good for kind of getting it to the right place, good for the recognition of the customer. But on the more like human side of it, one thing, probably our number one tip, and we say this to all our new customers for CSAT as well, is lay the groundwork a bit first. So let your customers know this is going to come. We actually have in the Smileback Help Center like sample text for an email for both CSAT and for NPS. If you ever want, images like the Smileback logo or screenshots, we can provide you that as well. So whatever channels you have, newsletter. I know some of our customers even do actual paper magazine mailings, and just your general customer contact. If you get ready a couple of weeks in advance, let people know it's going to come, especially the main account contacts who you're going to survey. Tell them that this is coming, explain why it's valuable to them, because it is, right? If you're going to use this to serve them better, it's worth their while. And then that way they will be, more of them will be expecting it, more of them are likely to see it and click on it. And then once it's actually running, much like with CSAT, how you respond to the information is really important, because if people think they click the survey and it just disappears into a black hole, they'll stop bothering, right? But if they know that this survey gets results in terms of, contact with you, they know their feedback has been taken on board, it's helping to like solve problems they have, then over time, more people will do it, and they'll see the value in it, and they'll see the value in continuing to use it.
Makes sense. Rory, I'm going to turn to you in a minute, but we've got just a number of questions, I think, that follow on from what we're talking about here, Eben, if I can put you on the spot there. So Gillian says, is Net Promoter Score recognised in the UK as a customer relationship tool? Would we need to explain what it is to the client? I think this probably goes worldwide. How would you say the awareness of NPS almost as a brand or a recognised survey method, what is that like worldwide in the in perhaps the small business market as well?
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely best established in kind of big corporate America. As I say, it came out of the world of like management consultancy and kind of Harvard Business School, but it's spread very widely in the US now. It's definitely in use in Britain, but as I say, even if you thought all your customers definitely know what NPS is, it's still worth talking to them before you start using it, so they know to expect it. But I would say like the question is quite straightforward, right? It's quite simple. It's the question, the scale of 0 to 10, and then a comment box. So it doesn't necessarily, it's good to tell them that you're doing it and why you're doing it. I don't think the mechanics of NPS are necessarily that important to your customers. Like, they don't necessarily need to understand like every step of how it's their process. They just need to know that you're going to use this survey and you're going to use the results to help them better. That would be my main kind of message.
And Michael asked the question, is it best practice to send NPS to all end users or to decision makers? So who does it go to within a business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really, really good question. If you're going to do it to anyone, do it to the decision makers or the primary account contacts or whatever you call them, because as I say, it is particularly good for getting a sense of the overall satisfaction of those people who are going to make decisions around, around renewing your contract or not. But you can also use it to other customers, other contacts, because you may find out useful information. If the people who deal with you every day are dissatisfied, that will obviously eventually kind of reach the rest of the company. And as we'll see when we look at Smileback NPS, you can segment these things as well. So you can kind of create a survey campaign that's going to go to decision makers and name it as such, and a one for like the end users, and then you can get an idea of what those responses are like. And we also have options where you can, for ConnectWise, manage and port things like contact types and titles, which help you with that as well.
Got it.
So I would definitely start, I would start with the more focused group of the decision makers. Is a good place to start doing it, trying it out, and then maybe think about adding more people in as you go along.
Understood. Good advice. And John says that in his opinion, NPS is an enterprise metric, but very useful for SMBs too. John, I'd add to that by saying that I've seen NPS with more mature MSPs and MSPs who are starting to grow as a business, even in the SMB space. So perhaps lesson there for everybody who's joining us, perhaps not using NPS. This is something that the most progressive, more mature MSPs are using to get a competitive advantage. So Rory, if we turn to you, could you give us a little look at how NPS works in the Smileback tool?
Yeah, let me.
And keep those questions coming in while Rory's doing this. I can see Victor, Robert, Becky, we've got questions from you. Keep them coming in on Q&A, and I'll make sure I won't let Eben or Rory go anywhere until we've answered all of the questions.
So with Smileback, many of you will be familiar with how Smileback looks. Some of you, this might be quite new, but yeah, NPS just lives in this little tab down here. And this is kind of the pages where all of our responses go, which I'll highlight more towards the end, but I'll walk you through just the basic setup of the campaign, I think, just to kind of explain and show how it looks. If you are an existing Smileback user or somebody that does want to try out using NPS, definitely reach out to us and we will post the contact info, but we're always happy to do this on an individual basis and help you kind of optimize it for how you want to do it. But let's say, you're setting up like a quarterly NPS survey. You want it to go out on a certain frequency. We recommend doing it quarterly. So every 3 months, have this go out. As we'll go through, we'll kind of go through the initial steps. As part of Smileback's NPS, you are able to set up your own custom domain. So what this will allow it to do is so that the email appears to be coming from your domain. So it's familiar to your customers. They know they can trust it. They know that it's coming from you and not through necessarily the Smileback thing that they may or may not be completely familiar with. You can go ahead and add your own subject line here. And we have different recommendations on what you can do to try it out, maybe mix it up. And then have certain things that you can implement, like adding your logo, changing some of the coloring so that it fits your particular branding. And this is really just how the email that your customer receives will look. And then we can take a look at how it'll end up going. So you're able to, they can see, they know it's coming from you. It is following just the very simple and tried and true methodology of how likely are you to recommend. In this case, we're using our fictitious MSP, Southwest IT, to a friend or colleague. And then they're able to see it on a scale of 0 to 10. Go ahead and click one of the boxes and then immediately be taken to In this case, like a survey comment capture page. And you have some flexibility here. We have this kind of pre-written message where, it's asking, can you tell us why you chose your score? You can change that if you do want to change up the language here, or if you want to add something additional. And then just like we have with Csat, we do have the ability to enable the 2 marketing permissions. So the first one here is asking permission to use the comment and their name and their company name in your public marketing. This can go a few different places. So one of them is just simply to be earmarked as a testimonial that your marketing team can use, your sales team can go and put in decks, or you can go out and put out into the world. We also have this feed into a website widget where you can actually have these responses populate as they come in. So this will only show when somebody's giving you initial 9 or 10. So you don't really have to worry about, somebody giving you a 4 and then being able to leave a review on your website or anything like that. It is kind of gated. But that's the first marketing permission. The second is also to the Google reviews functionality. So this will allow when the customer types a comment, of course, when it's only like a promoter score, taken to your Google My Business page with that review box open, they can paste their review, give you the 5 stars and have the comments there. And I think something we've seen or just in our customer base is NPS in particular gets you really good comments to put on your Google reviews, especially because a Google review can be good when somebody's saying like, oh, my printer was broken and it was fixed very quickly. But it's particularly useful for building social proof. And when somebody's considering using his business, when they say, I love this service, it's such great value for money, or I've been using them for a decade and they're always so reliable. So we use that there. And then again, you have kind of a customizable thank you message here. And this is how the experience would look. So, somebody has the top score. You have these, again, trying to keep the survey very simple and not overburden and to be like the really bad surveys out there in the world that act like they're going to be simple and then ask loads and loads of questions and then you learn not to fill them out. So it is as simple as giving initial response, adding a comment if you'd like, and being able to give additional feedback and thoughts there. And then so then part of it, and this is kind of what Evan discussed before, probably the best way to use NPS is to actually import your contacts directly from whatever help desk you're using, whether it's ConnectWise, Autotask, Zendesk, Freshdesk, and we can do that here. So yeah, you'll have to just make sure you have your permissions right. We're of course happy to help you with it if you run into any roadblocks, and then we'll confirm here. And I actually, 1 second. Just a bit slow. So yeah, so this will be where all the filters will pull from your instance. So you'll be looking at the context types that you already have set up within, say if you're using ConnectWise, what their individual titles are. I think Evan had mentioned, even if you have a contact type that is like decision maker, that's a really good individual to try to at least start off and simplify. And what you can do is go through here and set these kind of rules. If you want to survey everybody, you can do that. If you want to limit it by type, if you just want to start off with maybe your biggest clients and limit it to a few particular companies, you can do that. One thing we added that I think for ConnectWise managed users has been really powerful are these marketing groups. So if you already are grouping people in this way with ConnectWise, this can be a really nice way to pull those up. And then what you do is kind of set these rules so that we know what to go out and pull. We'll go ahead, ping your instance there, and then pull up the recipients, and you can go through and see, okay, are these the people I actually want to survey? Maybe I want to exclude a few others. And then every time Smileback goes to run the survey, say the next quarter, we'll go and see those rules and see which contacts fit those rules. So say if you added more decision makers, you added clients over the last few months, you don't have to manually go up and add them. And then, yeah, from there, you're able to set the survey live. There will be a global rule. So this will say if you set up multiple NPS campaigns and say a decision maker or a contact might be in your quarterly campaign, and then maybe you want to do a one-off, or you just have a lot different running. You can set a rule that makes sure that, say, somebody doesn't get, an NPS survey today and then one tomorrow, or you can separate it by level of weeks. I think we recommend most people at least set it up for like 2 weeks or so, often like a month, just to make sure you're not over surveying with NPS. And then when you're done, you can set it live. And then as the campaigns go out and reviews are received, everything will live in this responses page here in Smileback. So it's really easy for you to go in and say, Okay, maybe you're about to go talk to a particular company. Let's filter by them and see, what results came in there. Or if you're interested in seeing how, decision makers are rating you versus your champions, or if you are one of these people that is surveying all end users, maybe you want to see if there's a difference in how an end user is responding compared to the decision makers and others at the company. So you're always able to filter there, even by scores or particular campaigns, and then using these to see maybe if you want to look at what are the highest scores that came in over the last 90 days or any custom period, you can go ahead and try to sort and filter by all those.
That's very cool. And I noticed you got a 10 out of 10 there from Arnie Bellini, the outgoing CEO.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely not dummy data. Nope.
So many good questions that we come in there. Thank you for that, Rora. We've got a lot of questions come in, but I want to pick up on one point that you mentioned there, almost a throwaway comment, and that was the ability for Smileback to connect with Google reviews. And Robert and a number of other people have given big smiley faces for that, because I think this is, and this goes for everybody watching today, I think this is a massively utilized area of promotion for managed service providers and IT companies. Go and, after this webinar is finished, go and do a Google search and have a look what's coming up for your, not just for you, but for your competitors as well. And I guarantee you that many of your competitors are going to get really high scores, and perhaps you're not up there. Now, it doesn't mean your competitors are better than you. It just means your competitors are going out there and gathering those Google surveys. So make sure that you do that within your business. And as you can see, Smileback's got a great way of doing that. So thank you, Rory, for mentioning that. Let's jump on to a number of these questions. And again, if you've got any questions for Eben or Rory, use the Q&A box on Zoom and make sure you send that across to us. Now, we've got technical questions here as well. I think you may have answered this, Rory, but Chris asks, with ConnectWise Manage, can we link directly like we do with Smileback, or do we have to import contacts? And that was a question that was sent in via the chat there.
Should I take this, Rory?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Eben, if you can answer that, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry to put you on the spot there, Rory.
Yes, I think what you're getting at here is the way that Csat works is it's sent directly by ConnectWise, right? You embed a little bit of Smileback code, and it's the same for Autotask and Freshdesk and everything else, a little bit of Smileback code in your existing closed or solved ticket notification that goes out when a ticket's solved. As we've been saying though, NPS is not tied to this particular like trigger or transaction of a service ticket being solved. It's being sent to a group of people you've chosen on a time basis that you've chosen, and the Smileback is handling that sending for you. So what we do in that case is you can import contacts from ConnectWise or upload them using a CSV as a kind of a backup option. That way, and it still uses the connection to ConnectWise in order to like pull the data and refer back to that data so that it stays up to date as well. So just to give you an example of what I mean by that is that you set up a campaign, it's going to go to active clients, and it's going to go to the people who are marked with the decision maker type. If any of those clients stop being clients, they drop out of that group. Right, and anyone who's new, they come into it. So in 3 months' time, it gets imported afresh, and that way it stays up to date. So that's yeah, it all stays in sync. It's just that Smileback will be doing the actual sending you the email.
Got it. Thank you for the question, Chris. And I think it was Robert who mentioned that NPS isn't proprietary to Smileback. He used Microsoft Forms to do this. But I think, hopefully, Robert, you can see from the demo Rory's given there's a lot of value to be added on looking at the data that you collate afterwards there. Another question, a technical question, Eben, so I'll turn to you on this one. So Jason says, will we need to add your server names in IP addresses to our SPF records so the email doesn't get blocked? So this is going back to making sure that the email is sent out as your business and not a Smileback, isn't it? But is that something we can do where the server name and IP addresses need to get updated?
So the custom domain setup will provide you with an SPF and a DKIM record, which you add to your DNS management, and I can if you write in to help@smileback.com, I can also get you the IP address of the mail server to if you want to add that as an extra kind of level of whitelisting. Yeah.
Got it. That makes sense. And if you're watching this and thinking, what is SPF? What are IP address ranges and all the rest of it? Don't worry about it. Just fire an email off to Eben and he'll sort it all out for you.
Yeah, and also every step of the NPS campaign setup, you'll see at the bottom of the screen. There's usually, if it's anything more technical or complicated, there'll be a link at the bottom of the screen, which will take you to the part of our help center that has like the full information on that process.
Got it. Makes sense. So some feedback as well. So Brandon says we use marketing groups in communication manager groups, and it works absolutely great. So great feedback there. Chris says I was thinking of linking into ConnectWise Manage. So decision makers is our way to get going. Eben, actually, is that if people perhaps don't want to feel as though they're spamming everybody, where would you start with NPS? Would you start with decision makers and then expand it from there?
I would start with the people that you have basically think of the people you talk to when you have a check-in with the client, be that a review meeting or something more often, and send it to those people, because one, they're really good people to gauge, especially if you kind of get the timing so that NPS is sort of going in between those meetings. And they're also the people you're going to have, the most opportunity to, as I said earlier, kind of lay the groundwork with and say, hey, before we next meet, we're going to send you this survey to give you a chance to very quickly give us feedback on on a kind of rolling basis as well.
Got it. Darren says they're using the website widget and been posting comments directly to our website, but they've not utilized NPS yet, so that widget's not active. We've also had quite a lot of people in the chat have been brave enough to give us links directly to their website where they've been putting the great feedback from customers on there. So thank you for sharing that. Rory, actually, on the Smileback website, do you have a link to any Smileback customers who are using the software very well and perhaps showcasing stuff?
We don't have it on the website, actually. We do have our own website widget where we feedback some of the comments that were cleared for testimonials.
Yeah,
we do have the case studies on our blog. So I really recommend it. Anyone who's looking to learn more to go to blog.smileback.com. And there you can basically, there's a few different ones about NPS or NPS and CSAT where you can kind of read about a particular client of ours who are using this. And those often have like a link to their website or a screenshot showing how they've used this information on their website.
Love it. That was very naughty of me, wasn't it, people? But I love to keep these two on their toes and make sure they are eating their own dog food, drinking their own champagne there. Chris says, does that SPF still work if your name servers are set to the Microsoft name servers, Eben?
I'm just going to say, please write an email to help@smileback.com because I'll need to dig into that a little bit more than I can do right now in the webinar.
No worries at all. Jason says, very excited to implement this. And Catherine has actually posted, Eben, your online calendar so people can go and book a call with you immediately, or email help@smileback.com for any questions. So I think we're grilling them well enough here, but if we've got any deeply technical questions, let's take those offline for them. Right, let's jump into some of these other questions that have come in here. So Becky asks a really good question. And Rory, if I turn to you, she said, can you expand on using your promoters as a case study? So that's something you alluded to earlier on. So those people who gives us a 9 or a 10, how are you seeing MSPs turn those into case studies?
It's a good question. So I think, yeah, especially if you see routinely somebody does give you that high score, at some point I think it would be good to, one, thank them, offer something of value. We always recommend, maybe not during COVID times, but like taking the people that are your biggest champions out for lunch or doing nice things or even sending gifts. And then from there, I think ask them, just ask questions, get into conversation. I know a lot of times for us, we find case studies by specifically somebody says the kind of specific need that we're fulfilling or a problem that we solved, just getting into conversation with them and seeing if they're open to being interviewed and then turning that into some piece of content that we can put out.
Got it. Some other great questions coming in here, and I'll make sure that we get to everybody's questions, so thank you, and keep them coming in if you've got any burning questions. So Robert asks, can we get Smileback to integrate with a PSA or RMM to send a survey when a ticket is closed? Rory, if I turn to you on that one. So PSA and RMM or just PSA?
It'll be just PSA.
Just PSA, yeah.
And in this case, if you want to survey after the ticket's closed, that's again a transactional measurement. So you'd want to use CSAT for that. So that's where you'd use our CSAT tool, where the ticket's closed and they get a survey, and it's very relevant at that moment because you're already letting them know with that resolution email that like you had this issue that you raised has now been resolved. Please let us know how it went. And then from there, you can, through the integration with your PSA, also pull those right contacts and then set that frequency. So independent of tickets, again, you don't want to measure it on the transactional basis, but say on a quarterly basis, survey with MPS.
Makes sense. Robert also asked, should we do a survey for every closed ticket? Eben, perhaps I'll turn to you on that one. What do you see MSPs doing out there? And I appreciate we're talking NPS today, but it's going to blur into CSAT and it's all customer services. So why not ask the question?
Yeah, I would say definitely run CSAT on every ticket. We do it. I think we would advise any of our customers to do it. And I'm pretty sure that 99% plus of customers do that, because you always want to give people the chance to feedback, right? If someone is unhappy and you didn't ask them, then the chances are they actually won't tell you. The kind of research into this shows that like most unhappy customers won't proactively like contact you to tell you that they're unhappy, right? It's often only if something's gone incredibly wrong that they'll like write their own email about it. Whereas the whole reason we started Smileback was to make it as easy as possible to give you feedback whenever it's relevant, whether they're happy somewhere in the middle or they're unhappy.
Yeah, and I think it's even more relevant in the current COVID time. So when I used to run my MSP business, myself and engineers, we often used to do what we called floor walks, where we would just go out to a client site, walk around and say, hey, how are you doing? Really rudimentary sort of NPS back in the day. And we would often uncover festering issues. The printer in the corner's not worked for 9 months and you've not done anything about it. And when we've asked people, well, why didn't you tell us about that earlier? Oh, we didn't want to bother you. So these sort of things fester there. So I think, we can't do site visits as easily nowadays. So what Eben says about sending those tickets out, really important. And Robert, just an observation there. I work with a lot of MSPs worldwide, and I think I would say the response rate to the typical PSA ticket closure for the built-in surveys, ConnectWise, Autotask, and others tend to be about 1%. So you only get 1 in every 100 or so actually respond. And I know perhaps Rory, you can correct me on this, but when we talked about it, the feedback for Smileback surveys tends to be about sort of 48%, doesn't it?
42% is our
42%.
average.
Yeah. So very, very impressive there. And to close off on Robert's questions, he says, can we get the results published to our website? So I think we found the answer yes, based on Rory's demo there. So let's jump through to some other questions. Michael says, can you set up email workflows based on NPS reactions like we've done for CSAT? Eben, I'll turn to you on that one.
That isn't currently available in Smileback NPS, but it is something we're looking at adding in the future. And actually, I'd really, if you could maybe send me an email that gives me a bit more detail on what you're imagining, that would really help us. We're kind of taking an approach of rolling it out in stages, basically, to make sure we target what people most need and want from it. And that's definitely something we have under consideration at the moment. So yeah, adding some kind of automation that goes back to the ticket or back to ConnectWise in some way. Yeah,
makes sense. And if there's one email address you write down from today's webinar, it's help@smileback.com, and Eben and the team will be there to help out with any follow-up questions that you've got. Right, let's jump into a few other questions that have come in. So Chris asks an interesting question here, Rory. The demo you gave showed a preview via a PC browser. Does the NPS email still present well for mobile viewers? Because so many of us have got our smartphones where we just live and work and everything else in between with them.
Yes, yeah. They'll still look good on a phone as everybody's receiving the email. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Jason actually makes a comment and he says, unhappy feedback is way more important than happy feedback in his opinion. And Jason actually says he's a Smileback customer. We've turned around 2 relationships due to Smileback, mostly due to simple miscommunication between the client and the tech. I love that feedback, Jason. Yeah. Thanks for sharing it. It just shows it's so important at the moment to make sure that we're keeping our finger on the pulse.
Yeah, this is actually something I wanted to talk about,
Please.
Based on what you talked about earlier about maybe people sometimes a bit scared to ask for feedback. Yeah. I mean, it's like turning a smoke alarm off because you're scared of the noise it makes and then letting your kitchen catch on fire, right? It's like you want to get bad feedback. You want to get every bit of bad feedback your customers have because then you can act on it. And I totally understand why techs might be worried about that. I'm ultimately accountable for our customer feedback. Wallace, my boss, who's on the call right now, he sees it all my colleagues see it all. And I have to explain when we get bad feedback, but that doesn't need to be done in a way that's like, you got one bad response or one of your clients gave a bad response, you're out of here. It's like, what happened here? Why do we think this happened? Is this something you could have done something about? Does this reflect a failure maybe earlier in the process before you're involved? It's a learning opportunity where the individual engineer might be the person who most needs to improve, but often it's actually more like a process thing. Like, did that engineer actually have the information they needed at the time they needed to do this better? Was it a technology failing that needs to be taken up with the vendor? So it's all useful information that ultimately is hopefully going to mean that the business thrives and grows and everyone keeps their job.
Absolutely. Great feedback there. So let's rapid fire through some of these questions. We've got some good ones. So Victor asks, what could be the perfect cadence for sending out NPS surveys to clients? Rory, Eben.
I've so far seen, I think just quarterly is a really good cadence. I think quarterly will take care of, it's enough touch points throughout the year. You're giving somebody enough opportunity to let you know if they're not valuing the relationship as much as they were before without overdoing it. As Eben mentioned earlier, like maybe you're working on a project with a particular client where you're heavily invested and there's a lot going on, in which case maybe it's a quarterly project, you want to survey on a monthly basis or potentially even more frequently, because that level of just corresponding and getting feedback can be useful. And then as well, maybe if you have major changes or anything you go through, maybe you do a one-off here and there just to see. And then especially if you are following the best practice of doing like a quarterly business review, definitely recommend surveying around the time you're about to do those meetings.
Yeah, understood. And I know we've got the webinar today about Net Promoter Score, about NPS. If you're joining us for the first time, we actually recorded another webinar. Was it last month, gents? I can't recall now, where we covered a lot of the topics that we're talking about today, but people can go to the Smileback website and catch the recording of that. So I'd encourage you to do so. But just to clarify, so some people are talking about Csat, talking about NPS, just to clarify here. So Robert and Becky both asked the question. We've talked about Csat and NPS as separate surveys. Why can't we have both in the same survey?
Yeah, that wouldn't play best to the strengths of the two types of survey effectively. So let's say you trigger a Csat survey at the close of a ticket because you want to ask the customer how they feel about that particular interaction. Having asked that with Csat, it wouldn't be particularly useful to add NPS onto it again, because they might just repeat basically the same information. They might just be bored and annoyed that they now have this other type of question, right? And then for NPS, because it isn't triggered on a particular occasion, there's not really a scope to use Csat. And really a guiding principle of Smileback has always been simplicity. What we wanted to get our customers away from was sending big, long forms with a scale and a free text and like check these boxes. I don't know if you've ever done one of those customer surveys where it's got like a progress bar and you get to 90%, and then depending on what you click, it falls back to 75%. So you just give up, right? You just close the tab.
Yeah.
So Smileback, like, we're always trying to get the sweet spot of extracting the most useful information from the most possible people, and usually that means keeping things focused and keeping them simple.
Got it. Yeah, and Becky says so. She's considering sending Csat after an invoice and NPS quarterly to all filtered customers. That'd be a good place to start there.
That sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah. Chris asked a really good question here. What's a good subject line after informing clients? Eben, you just sucked air for that one. You've got a great answer lined up for us.
For the survey itself, for NPS, sorry, I would go with something that suggests that has a question in it that kind of tees it up nicely, and it usually builds a bit of like interest in the email. I often suggest something really simple like, how are we doing? Sometimes it's nice to go with something that like is a bit more timely, like, hey, you know, your opportunity to share your feedback. The reason I wince a little bit is I spend a lot of time thinking about and playing around with subject lines, and it can be a little bit hard to come up with like the one best NPS subject line.
The most perfect NPS subject line of all time.
It will work for all of our customers in like every region and every industry, but it's the kind of thing I'm very happy to talk to people in more detail. Yeah.
Personal question here, Eben. Would you put an emoji on that subject line or not? Because when it comes to email marketing, we've actually found we get higher open rates when emojis are included. Would that apply for surveys?
I like a good emoji in a subject line. What I would say though is with MSPs, because you're almost always sending to people who are using Outlook, check that it looks good on desktop Outlook first. Because it will turn them into black and white. Some look really good like that, and then some just kind of look like weird little smudges that you can't tell what they are.
Yeah, and then we've now got a flood of emojis in the chat box as well, showing their emoji foo. Right, let's jump into a couple of interesting questions. So Tara asks, she says, from BrightGauge, so if anybody's not familiar with BrightGauge, a third-party tool for grabbing MSP data and presenting it, she says, after looking through the API endpoints made available to us through BrightGauge, it seems that the Net Promoter Score field is not available through the API. There, we wouldn't be able to add it to any of our data sets. And Tara says she wants to create a gauge with campaign information for NPS. Is this something that's on the roadmap, Eben, or have you got a workaround already?
The API data, the NPS data is available on the Smilback API. I strongly suggest you email BrightGauge and ask them, because I don't normally like to push things off onto other people, but the data is there, and the more demand from their customers there are, the more they will bump that up their I'm sure they have a huge inbox of product things to do, but then more that will rise up the pile on their end. This is something I do bring up and chase them about, because I want to get it there for our customers as well, and I'll do that again tomorrow. Now you mentioned it.
So Tara, yeah, the guys at BrightGauge do a really good job, are very responsive to these things. So I'd reach out there and just let them know, say, hey, the information's there. Would you be able to roll that out in the next update just for us, because we're really important. Let's have a look. Other questions here. So Damon says, can the NPS data be extracted to SQL or Power BI for custom reporting? Eben's nodding. So Eben, tell us more.
Something we did just before Christmas is make our API much more accessible to our customers. So inside the Smilback app, you'll now find kind of credentials for setting that up. You can use that for CSAT and NPS data. We have a Power BI connector. I would need to double check if NPS is there, but I would definitely suggest the API is probably the best way to go, just because of the flexibility it offers.
Got it. So I'm keeping an eye on the time here. So final call for questions. If you've got any burning questions for Eben or Rory, put them into the Q&A box now, just while we wait for those to come through as well. So some really good feedback from people talking about how they've dealt with negative feedback from people. So Gillian, for instance, says, we ring anyone who does a red or yellow face. Smilback users will know what we're talking about there. The issue helps us improve our internal processes. And often it turns out they pressed the wrong face. Michael says, Gillian, we do the same, and we found exactly the same. Users click on the wrong face. So actually they might be happy, but have clicked on the incorrect thing. But I'm guessing, Rory, that is a good thing, because it shows that you're responding to negative feedback, even when the negative feedback doesn't exist.
Yeah, no, I think so. I always say it's great to give your customers a voice. It's really bad to ignore it, especially if they do raise their hand and say, hey, I've got a problem, or I'm not entirely happy. And in this case as well, it's very good that you're following up and engaging with the customer when they do hit a yellow or red face. And it is, I guess, it would be very useful to find out if they're frustrated what the issue was. But in this case, it's also good to figure out that they actually just clicked the wrong face, and you can just edit the review.
There you go. I love that. And Gillian, you should reward people. Well, perhaps not reward people for hitting the accidentally hitting the wrong faces, because they might start doing that a bit like Pavlov's dog and just doing that when you send them treats or something. Don't know what the answer is there. So Sophia says, for anyone who wants to keep up with the new releases like the API that Eben mentioned, look out for the Smallback email newsletter. So make sure to keep an eye out for that one. And final question here then from Gillian. She says, can you use the primary contacts flag? Eben, if I turn to you one, she says, we don't really classify individuals using the field type, but our primary contact is usually the person we have the relationship in the business with. So can you use the primary contacts flag?
So we don't, at least right now, have a import or a filter field specifically for primary contacts. But what I would say is that you can, using the marketing groups and ConnectWise manage, my understanding from I had a conversation about this a couple of weeks ago with a customer, is basically filter your primary contacts with the contact search, and then add them to a group called NPS primary contacts, and then that is already available on Smallback. You'll see that in the marketing groups filter, you can then just select those people as a group that way.
Wonderful. Thank you for the question, Gillian. So, and thank you both for answering so many great questions today. I've put you on the spot more than once, and you've held up really, really well. So just before we finish off for the day, perhaps, Katrin, if we can throw a poll up on screen there, because I'm intrigued that the number of people who started off today's webinar not really knowing what NPS is, and I'm interested, are you going to start using Net Promoter Score within your MSP business? And for the benefit of the people watching the recording, the answers were already use it, yes soon, yes later this year, or no. Hit the button and let us know what your thoughts are on that. While we're waiting for the poll results to come through, and I'll share those with you momentarily. Eben, Rory, thank you for joining us today. You've been absolutely brilliant. Any final thoughts? If there was one thing that you could tell people about Net Promoter Scorers to take away from today's webinar, what would it be? Eben, I'll turn to you first.
I would just say, give it a go. It's one type of survey. Lots of people have found it useful. The exact results for your company, are going to vary, but you will almost certainly find out something useful. I've spoken to so many customers who have, after they've sent their first one, have said, you know what, I was surprised by some of the results. Like I didn't realize these people were happy, or, we got great feedback and it gave us a real boost. So just, get out there and try it, basically.
Yeah, good advice. Rory, what's your one NPS tip for people to take away?
It's quite similar to Evan's, actually. I would say just get started and start with something simple. Pick a handful of clients that you think would either be interesting or you just want to try it out with. Set up one campaign, have it go out, keep the frequency, and see what kind of feedback you get, and then expand from there. So don't be scared. Don't be worried about negative feedback. You can learn some useful things, and negative feedback is only a problem if you don't know about it or don't do anything with it.
Good advice. Good advice. So, Katrin, if we can close the poll there, and I'll give people the results. So the question was, are you going to start using NPS? And 21% of people said they already use it. 21% said yes, they're going to use it later this year. 1% say no. And overwhelmingly, 54% say yes, they're going to start using Net Promoter Score soon. So I think that is a result for both of you as Net Promoter Score fans there. Thank you, Eben and Rory. Final questions, I guess. For you as an audience, does this format work for you? Have you enjoyed today? Let us know whether you would like us to do more of these type of webinars. And if so, what topics you would like us to cover. We record all of these webinars, as we've said. You can find them on the Smallback website. What topics would you like us to cover? Let us know in the chat box or drop us an email at hello@smallback.com. If you would like to continue the conversation, details for getting in touch with Eben and Rory are on screen. You can find me on Twitter at Tubblog, TUBBLOG, or you can email me at richard@tubblog.co.uk if you want to talk anything managed services. So we've got some great feedback. Michael says, very useful webinar. Thank you, Rory and Eben and Richard. Jason says, thanks, guys. Very informative and helpful. Darren says, always good to see the Smallback team. And I think final one there from Robert Takes the Biscuit. He says, I give today's session an NPS score of 9.999. 99. That was a really high score. So Grace says, great webinar. Thanks very much. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Eben and Rory. I've really enjoyed today. That concludes today's webinar. I really appreciate your time. See you on the next one.